Hey there, spooky friends, and welcome to another episode of the Scaryish podcast.
Woo!
I'm Robin Grace. This is Adam Diaz,
Hello.
and today we have a couple topics. I think they're very different from each other.
I think so.
But what are you covering this week?
So this week I'm going to be covering Prophecies number 2.
I did not even realize we did a Prophecies number 1.
We did. In fact, we did it in episode 1. So.
Oh, that is why.
Yep.
That is why I was like, wait, what? Okay, it's because it's been like 300 episodes. No, 230 episodes, obviously. You said episode 230.
Correct.
Plus all of the story times and all the pasta times that we've done. So it's been a lot of episodes.
It's been a lot of content between the first one and this one. The first episode was Curses and Prophecies, so we had like a mixture of both.
You're a mixture of both.
Thanks.
Your topic is Prophecies. I'm going to be covering a haunted gorge / bridge over a gorge. So
Haunted area, I guess we could go with.
yeah. So I'm going to go first with my topic. This week I'm gonna go back to like our little spooky roots, right?
Hang on, before you jump into that, Robin, tell me, how are you doing? I mean, I know that you're shattered emotionally because I flew home a few days ago. That was rough on both of us.
So shattered.
You seem to be just like so happy. Like every time I leave, you just like the goodbyes get shorter and shorter at the airport. You like pull up, park the car. Nowadays, you just slam it into like, you don't even put it into gear. You just like brake and you're like, get the fuck out of the car. So
I give you keys.
You do. But yeah, I mean, how's things been since the folks heard from us the last topic episode? I think overall things have been pretty good.
Nothing has changed. I do nothing different. We have not done any conventions. I just do my thing. I'm gonna be working on self-improvement. That's my thing. I'm gonna start working on self-improvement.
Right on. And that's a good thing to work towards. So you're pretty great already, so getting better is just meaning that you're going to be amazing. And then, yeah, for me, I flew back to Las Vegas. I spent Mother's Day with my mother. Basically did whatever she wanted to do, which was pretty cool. And then I'll be back here for next few weeks or so. I don't know how long I'm actually going to stay out before I'm back out there. But aside from that, yeah, things are just, work. So
work.
Fun
Don't
stuff.
Copyright strike us.
Yeah, let's hope not.
Yeah, no, there's no way. That sounds nothing like the actual song.
I don't know. I thought Rihanna. It's Rihanna, right? I thought she was in the room.
I don't know. I have no idea like who sings songs half the time. I just know certain lines because they're in like TikToks and stuff or on Instagram. I don't know. Anyway, so this week, like I was saying, it's gonna be a little bit on the creepy side because I feel like I haven't done like a haunting in a while. I have done a lot of true crime lately. We did that one-off episode about dangerous or creepy animals.
The scariest animals is what we did.
Yeah. So because I have this incredible desire to go to Japan lately, and because it is locked and we can't get in, I'm like that guy at the gate. Who's like, let me in.
Seriously. They have said that they're projecting they're going to open it up for tourists in June. So fingers crossed.
But not completely. They're just raising how many people can come into the borders at a time. Right now, it's only 10,000 a day. So imagine if they open up, for more tourists, it's going to be like maybe 20,000 a day. Not even that. We'll see.
Been reading speculation is that in June, they're hoping to start opening it back up for tourists in general, which is a good sign. It means they're slowly opening up the gates. So
yeah, they're going to do specific, like, this is like a travel podcast now, but it's going to be very specific tour groups and things like that. It's not going to be full blown yet. So we'll see how long it takes for us to actually be allowed in. But because of this desire to want to go to Japan so bad, I figured I'd cover something from Japan, and it would inspire me to just want to go a little less.
I don't know if that's going to be the case.
So there is a national park outside of the city of Tokyo called the Chichibu Tama National Park. And it's a park that actually has a bunch of mountains that have peaks that reach up to like 2,000 meters high and are scattered over 1,250 square kilometers. So it's a pretty wide area that it covers. It actually covers 4 different prefectures. So that's Saitama, Yamanashi, Nagano, and Tokyo, which everybody knows. In this park, there's an area that is called the Oiran Buchi, and it, I guess, translates to courtesan gorge. And a gorge is like a valley, right?
Right.
It's a big hole. Big hole in the
It's a big hole in the
thing.
ground. I know gorge based off of Springfield Gorge, which is from The Simpsons. So I assume that's correct.
So it's pretty picturesque, located in the Japanese countryside, but you'd never know that it is actually the location of a mass murder that was perpetrated back in the 16th century. The area is nice. It's pretty. There's like a modern day suspension bridge there. It's just like a place tourists seem like they would want to go, right? But we'll hop into our TARDIS and go back in time.
Can you do the TARDIS noise?
No, can you?
Whoosh,
it's like
whoosh.
No.
Whoosh.
Oh, I was gonna do like actual noises, like, you know, heavy breathing.
Go for it. I think everyone's ready
know.
for that ASMR.
Nah. So if you
Heavy
haven't
breathing.
seen,
Do you really associate heavy breathing with the TARDIS? I never thought of the TARDIS noise being like,
it goes like I don't know. That's snoring. Who knows? No one wants to hear this. Okay. So if you guys haven't been following, there's a new doctor that's going to be coming about. So I'm wondering how they'll be able to take the reins from Jodie Whittaker.
we really need to catch up on that show.
We do really need to catch up. I'm excited to see what they can do with the Doctor. But anyway, again, we're going to go back in time to when the Takeda clan was top dog during the Sengoku Jidai. It's like a time period, right, in Japan's history. And they controlled all these gold mines, and they took full advantage of it. They used all the gold that they mined for a whole bunch of different things. So they obviously bought a bunch of stuff. I skipped ahead. I don't even know. Okay. We gotta restart. Okay. So they had a whole bunch of gold mines that they definitely took full advantage of. But mining these gold mines required manpower. And apparently that also meant that they needed women to entertain this manpower.
Oh, Courtesan Gorge. I'm starting to understand the name.
Right. So, and it's just like, because apparently men don't know how to entertain themselves. It's like, I'm going to say this now. If you're a grown-ass man, you can fucking entertain yourself, okay? You're more than capable of entertaining yourself.
So, but then the name of the place would be like Jerk Off Gorge or something like that.
It's just like, these people could have played old school tabletop games like Go or something, or like sit around and relax as a group, drink, tell stories, or if you really need to pleasure yourself, just like handle yourself. I don't understand why in these situations it's always like, we need somebody else to pleasure us. They can't handle themselves. I don't understand. They do
seem pretty spoiled. I mean, I don't know any job that comes with a benefit package like that, so.
I'm sure they had to pay for it themselves, but still. So, anyway, these were like high-end courtesans, supposedly. And some sources do say that the high-end courtesans wouldn't have actually served the miners. The basic, like, Yujo, which is just like basic courtesan, would service them, as opposed to these top-ranked ones called the Oiran. So it's like really confusing why this area is named after high-ranked courtesans when it's most likely basic ones. But we'll get there. So the gold from the mine was used to fund wars. They used the gold to offer to the gods for good luck and things like that. And it's even said that they buried a bunch of it in the mountains that surround the area, in the hills of all these mountains. So none of the gold that they had, didn't matter how much they had, could prevent their inevitable demise. So this clan was run by Takeda Shingen, and he was the dad. He ran the clan. He did everything. He knew what he was doing. But eventually, as a lot of different, companies, different groups, they always hand it off to their kids. So he hands it off to his son, Katsuyori, who did not run this clan as well as he could or should have. So there was a battle, the Battle of Nagashino, sometime in the 1560s or 1570s. I don't quite remember, but they lost. And after this loss, they lost their fortunes, and their fortunes were supposed to be handed over to their enemies. He, Katsuyori, was killed on April 3rd, 1582. And once he died, it was like the clan was no more. There was no one to run it. Anyone left in the clan went around to hide what they could, and they were trying to prevent the discovery of any of their family gold or any of the corresponding mines. They didn't want it to fall into the hands of their enemies. So how did they decide to stop the spread of their secrets, you might ask? They went to silence all the courtesans, apparently.
Wow, that's fucked up.
Because that's what they thought was going to be their weakest link. So they thought all these courtesans that they'd brought in to entertain the men had all of the secrets because they spent so much time with the miners and all the people that were there to do all this work. And this valuable information could prove troublesome for the clan in the wrong hands. So they made a plan, which is not so good for the victims. The surviving clanspeople created a large platform over the Yanagisawa River nearby, where it flows into the Ichinose River. And upon completion of this platform, the women, the courtesans, were invited to practice a dance on said platform for like a farewell party, right? Because they're all leaving. They're all getting out of there. The story goes that at the peak of their dance, soldiers cut the vines that held up the platform and caused the whole thing to collapse. So all 55 women that were on this platform fell into the gorge below. So some died from the fall, where there were others that survived the fall, but got swept away with the river current, and then were sent over the waterfall that was there.
Wow.
So that's how they died. The bodies of all the women were found downstream by some villagers, and these villagers had to pull them out of the water and then bury them. So a monument, not so much a monument, but like a sign, was built to kind of be a memorial for these people that died, which I think is absolutely sad. That's a lot of people to get murdered all at once over something so silly as like we want to protect our secrets, you know. But these women, though having their bridge named after the Oiran, are sometimes said to have been kunoichi, which I'm sure you've heard before in like Naruto or different animes or something like that. It's the difference between a high-class courtesan and a ninja. So
no, none of this is ringing a bell. I'm learning right now.
So apparently the term Oiran didn't come about until around 1603 to 1868. So it's after the incident is slated to have happened. So this makes a group of ninjas seem more likely than a bunch of high-class courtesans, because why would they use the term that wasn't even invented yet? You know? So some people think that it was kind of a group of kind of like spies, right? These ninjas, spies, gathering information.
And they were convinced to go out on this thing and they were dropped into the gorge, or is it just like a different backstory?
So it said that these people were used as spies, collected information on allies and enemies, but maybe they called them courtesans to cover up their covert activity. Who knows if they talked them onto the bridge and then cut the bridge while they were on there, or if it was like, y'all need to go on there and force them on there. Who knows? I don't know. Right now, all I know is that that bridge is named after a bunch of high-class courtesans, you know?
Gotcha.
So who knows? It could be spies. It could be these high-class courtesans, or it could be the everyday courtesans that were given a high-class title, like an honor, because of how violently they were killed.
Because they were murdered for no reason other than to protect secrets that may or may not have existed.
Yeah. So I would like to insert here that there is no note that I could find that stated they killed any of the miners or the guards over the whole incident.
Just the women.
Just these 55 women. So now that you all know what happened at this particular location, I can tell you folks about the inevitable ghosts and hauntings that occur because of such a violent occurrence. That's what everyone always waits for. We want to know about the ghosts, right? We want to know about the creepy stuff. So
now that we know how they were made, we can talk about the ghosts themselves.
Legend has it that because of the large and sudden amount of deaths at this location, the land is quote unquote imprinted with the negative energy and spirits of those that have died. They say the whole area is shrouded in like a strange cold feeling when you go there. People that have visited the area report that the most activity, like most of the activity, it happens at night. And the most common experiences that people have are the sounds of cries and screams, like there are women that are falling to their deaths, which if I were out there at night and I heard that would be absolutely terrifying. Some say that the cries come from the bottom, actually, as if there are people down there, like women down there asking for help, which is also horrifying. It's said that there's also singing that's been heard on this modern day suspension bridge that exists there now, where the platform once was, which is terrifying. So any disembodied anything, I think, is terrifying. Much like the Aokigahara forest, it's recommended that anybody that wants to visit the site do so during the day because you can easily fall off the bridge. Men especially are cautioned because these spirits are said to be very vengeful towards men. Anybody who dares come near the site is said to be pushed. Like someone's trying to push them off.
Fuck that.
And make them experience the same fate that they did.
I will pass on visiting this place. I have a fear of heights and of ghosts.
Yep. There's a sign that is near the current day bridge. And it's kind of like the monument that stands for the incident. And it tells the story of what happened there. It's said that this sign itself is said to be haunted or cursed. Legend has it that if you read the entire sign, like the whole sign in its entirety, a curse will be placed upon its reader. Also, apparently the road that runs near the bridge has also been the spot of numerous deadly car crashes, though this could either be due to the ghosts or the bad vibes, or just bad visibility or traction. I don't know, right? It could be either or. But the area has been deemed a historical site. Where this bridge and stuff is, it's been deemed a historical site. The nearby National Highway 411, the one that has had so many car accidents on it, has actually been closed due to some landslide damage that occurred in like 2011, which makes the site nearly impossible to get to. So to me, I kind of feel like the mountains really don't want anyone to visit the area. You know, it's like all this bad stuff happens and then they're like, landslide, stop coming, just enough, you know? And that kind of adds to the eeriness of the whole thing, I think. But yeah, that is the tale of the Oiran Buchi bridge/gorge.
Yeah, that's pretty terrifying. The idea that there's a full-blown landslide. Any ghost that's trying to keep you away from the place they haunt, it's a message that you should probably just take. Whether or not you're skeptical and you think that there aren't ghosts, if you're trying to go to some place like this and there's a landslide preventing you from doing it, I would say that's a pretty good sign. You should probably leave well enough alone. I am happy to hear that it's a historical site because it should be. They should remember the history of this place, and, the fact that it doesn't have this bright, sunshiny history is something that shows me that, they're going to be remembered despite the fact that they were treated as expendable so long ago. So there is that.
I mean, I feel like when it comes to women in these situations, they always become like side story characters and just get used and then tossed to the side. And then everybody else is like, yeah, we're getting out of here, but we're going to murder all these people first.
It is kind of shocking that none of the men who were the ones that supposedly had the secrets had anything happen to them. It's just like, oh yeah,
it's messed up.
As long as you get rid of the courtesans, we'll be fine. It's like, are you idiots? Like, if they're the ones that told the secret to someone, they're the liability. But hey, it would have been even more horrific if they murdered, I guess, more people. I shouldn't be rooting for more people to get murdered, but it's one of those weird things where it just it seems like there's definitely some form of inequality there. So,
all right.
But yeah, good stuff, Robin. Solid topic.
Thanks.
You weren't lying when you said it was going to be creepy/spooky. So
my goal was to make you want to go a little less.
Nailed it. So good work. But yeah, before we move into my topic, we're going to take a quick commercial break. And we're back. So this week, I really did want to revisit one of our earliest topics, which I have mentioned is prophecies. I'm not sure if you remember this, Robin. I'm sure now. Before I wrote this, I didn't, think you'd remember, but I've told you already. But our first ever official episode number 1, was Curses and Prophecies.
I cannot believe
right?
that.
It's been so long.
I can't believe it's been so long.
We've gone back to both of those topics since then. We've covered, prophecies, we've covered curses, but it's always something very specific, like a very specific curse, like the Curse of Tecumseh, or a very specific prophecy or set of prophecies, like the Simpsons prophecies, which, as a side note, are almost entirely social commentary that has just become relevant again, but people interpret that as a prophecy. I actually love the topic of prophecies, so it's just fascinating to me. But this thing happens where I'll find information out about one and then realize very quickly there really isn't a lot to talk about. It's really small. It's like, hey, here's what the prophecy was. Here's how it was fulfilled. And that's it. So I said, hey, how about I just do a group of smaller/shorter prophecies and call this episode Prophecies number 2. So that's exactly what I'm going to do.
Nice.
So here is how I want to cover this topic. So I'm going to go over some of the prophecies I've had hanging around on the list for a while, as well as some other ones that I've stumbled across. And I'm going to pick ones that will present themselves in different ways, because prophecies, I feel like they just vary in a bunch of different ways depending on, how they're fulfilled, how specific they were, who they came from, things like that. So we're going to go over, I believe, 4 in this particular episode. They're not super long, but they do connect through the theme of their prophecies. So
okay.
I want to jump into this with some of the stuff that I remember hearing about when I was younger, because this has always been something that's fascinated me. I actually covered my favorite prophecy way back in episode 1 during that prophecies episode, which is Timur's tomb, which is like half curse, half prophecy. It's about like a tomb that gets opened, and the day it's opened, I think the invasion of Poland began, and it was about like unleashing a new evil upon the world and all this other sort of stuff. So if you haven't heard episode 1, or if you just haven't heard in a long time and you're like, oh yeah, I remember that, go feel free to check that out after this episode, because I'll probably listen to it again myself. Around the time I heard about that one, I was in an ancient medieval history class. I heard of another one, and it took me a while to track this one down because I didn't remember many of the details. And I didn't remember who it was that had given this one, because it's not like a relatively famous person. And when I did find it, it was relatively short. And so I was just like, shit. But hey, this is the episode for it. So here we go. So there are a lot of prophets, quote unquote prophets, that have come around in the past that have gained notoriety by just stating that they can see the future, or have seen visions of the future, or something along those lines.
Right.
And in lots of cases, they make general predictions that are fairly obvious. Things that folks would expect to come true in the near future. Something like if this is a prophecy that I'm doing, an athlete who has battled in his life will raise a trophy when the moon is high. Something like that, where it seems specific, but it's really not.
And whenever they win, they all hold trophies, and I'm sure they've all gone through hardship.
Exactly. Like my Adam Stradamus prediction right there, it's obviously all going to come true at some point. Like Robin said, all athletes that are on the professional level have worked hard, and they've gone through a lot, and a lot of people come from rough circumstances. There are countless trophies that you can win during a professional career along the way, whether it's an individual award. There's like MVP, offensive awards, defensive MVP, rookie of the year, conference championships within your actual conference, or the national champion, or, finals champion, Stanley Cup champion, whatever.
I didn't realize the NHL stuff is going on right
and
now.
And the NBA. They're both in the playoffs right now. So if literally any trophy ceremony happens where an athlete's being presented with something and it coincides nearby a full moon, boom, my prophecy has been fulfilled. I am now a prophet. Centuries ago, stating something like that may have been enough to gain you a following. It's when a quote-unquote prophet made a prediction that had something specific that a lot of people wound up paying attention. So one guy who did just that is known as the Cheshire Prophet, all right? His real name was Robert Nixon, and he was alive during the late 15th century, so the late 1400s. When he was a kid, he was very, very introverted. Most folks, in fact, thought he did not possess the ability to speak because he was so shy, so painfully shy, he never spoke to people except for a few words to his parents. And he did, and it was just always sort of very, very quiet. So he was able to speak, but he just didn't really feel like talking in general. He was out with his parents one day when he was still a kid, and he pointed at an ox that was nearby. And when he pointed at it, he yelled out, "That ox is going to die in some way, shape, or form." And it's not a very bold prediction, since everything dies eventually. The ox could have looked old, or it could have been hobbling, or whatever. And everyone was just mostly surprised in that moment that this child, who they all thought was unable to speak, was now shouting. And then the ox dropped dead.
What?
So people were absolutely shocked. Like maybe Bobby here noticed the animal was choking when no one else noticed, or something like that. But everyone immediately jumped to the conclusion that he had just predicted this animal's imminent death. So he became, in that moment, what was known as a prophet. And his history of introversion up to that point and his silence was suddenly met from the idea that there was something wrong with him. In fact, they called him the village idiot up until that point. But now it was this idea that he was just introspective and he was waiting for these visions or these prophecies to come to him. So they viewed him in a different way. And if that was the case, why change it? You've kind of been treated like shit your whole life, and now people are looking at you in a different light. So he totally leaned into this for most of his, if not his entire life after that. And as an adult, when he got older, he'd make money off of people paying him to predict their future. In a lot of cases, it would be royalty. Royalty would invite him to events to deliver prophecies to the amusement or the amazement, depending on who you were, of their guests. And it said that he gave away some prophecies for free one night after getting drunk at a bar. So
because why not?
It's just funny to me because what if you really were a prophet and you're keeping all the stuff back, and then you go to a bar and you get shit-faced and you're like, fuck it, like I'm telling everyone. So that's essentially what happens here. So he told folks about a prominent figure that would rise to power amidst the civil war that would happen in England. And you could say maybe he was just, noticing someone that was gaining popularity at the time, and he just decided to make a prophecy about that person. Well, the person he was talking about wasn't going to be born for another 150 years. And folks state that whatever the exact verbiage was that he used really, really lines up with this particular individual. And in fact, the English Civil War wasn't something that was on people's minds at that point. And that happened about 180 years away. And he was convinced that not only would it happen, but this guy would be directly involved. So I should mention both those predictions did come true. He also declared to the patrons of that bar that the French would also undergo a war, except it would be a revolution as opposed to a civil war, which would also come true 300 years later. But again, this one is like kind of fairly non-specific. He just states, it's like this particular country is going to undergo a revolution. You can basically say that about any country, and as long as, they remember it, eventually that prophecy will most likely be fulfilled in one way or another.
Right.
The last one he stated, though, is the one he is most known for. This is why people remember his name. he told those people in that bar, quote, and this is probably not an actual quote, but the internet says it's a quote, "When a raven shall build its nest in a stone lion's mouth on top of a church in Cheshire, a king of England shall be driven out of his kingdom to return nevermore." End quote.
Wow.
So this one's super specific, and I'm sure at the time people were like, what the fuck is this guy talking about? But they wrote it down. They remembered it. And then one day in 1688, it was said that a raven had flown to the top of a church in Cheshire and built its nest in the mouth of a gargoyle. Some folks at that time interpreted that as a stone lion, as it was stated in the prophecy that Bobby Nixon had spoke of, literally at this point, 200 years ago. So it had been quite some time since this was prophesized. And then the next day after this happens, King James II was deposed from his throne and would never regain it despite military action. So it's a very specific, very high-stakes prophecy that winds up coming true. And people to this day question whether or not there was actually a raven who built a nest in a gargoyle's mouth. But there was a specific church that was referenced as being the one this happened at, and the individuals that were associated with it stated this absolutely did happen. And then the next day, the fact that the king was removed is pretty significant. I mean, if you Google King James II, it's a super long history book that you can read about, all the things he did before he was finally deposed and kicked out and how he tried to regain his throne. And it's a very specific prophecy where it states that he is to return nevermore. Like he tries to come back, but he just is never able to. So this one in particular is why Robert Nixon is remembered as someone who gave a prophecy that would then go on to be fulfilled. So the last thing Bobby Nixon spoke about when he was drunk that night, supposedly, is how he would die.
Oof.
And he told folks that he would die of, quote, thirst and starvation, which also turned out to be true. So the details are sketchy because the internet sucks, but whether he was stuffed into a wooden chest or just put into a new, more comfortable cell out of courtesy, what is agreed upon is that he was detained by King Henry VII and eventually died of hunger and starvation while in captivity. One story states that they stuffed him into a chest because he kept requesting stuff. Another story states because King Henry actually liked him, he asked that he be moved to a nicer room in his own chambers. And when that happened, the guard who moved him forgot basically to tell everyone, hey, I moved the guy. So he's locked up in this fucking room. And then the other guards come to bring him food or water, and they go to the dungeon. They're like, where the fuck did he go? And they're like, whatever, who cares? And he just winds up being discovered when the king gets back, like months later in this room, just completely dead. But in either case, he does wind up dying of thirst and starvation, which it would really suck to create a prophecy of how you were going to die.
Yeah, I would be so depressed, man, if if that came down into my mind and it was just like, hey, this is how you're going to die. I would chuck that shit.
Yeah, I don't think I'd want to see it either. I used to think in my younger days, like, go ahead and show it to me. Maybe I can do something to avoid it. But nah, I'm good. Like, I'd rather just not know and just continue on with my life. So, this one is just pretty notable because I've never heard of this guy. Like, I'd heard of him in high school when I was like reading about certain things like this, but he's not someone that's like, on the tip of the tongue of every person that wants to talk about prophecies. So it's at this time that I'm going to move into a couple of shorter ones. And since I just mentioned that this isn't someone who is well known, it shouldn't surprise you that I'm going to cover a few by someone who is well known. And that person is, of course, Nostradamus. So, Nostradamus is probably one of the most famous prophets. Using the word prophet is kind of dangerous. So I'll just state prophet outside of prominent religious figures. But if you say Nostradamus, most folks have an idea of who you're talking about. For those of you who don't know, Nostradamus was a guy in the early to mid 1500s who claimed to be a prophet and put out a shit ton of prophecies, some of which, quote unquote, were fulfilled, some of which have not been fulfilled. So lots of folks still talk about Nostradamus to this day because he has so many prophecies. And like I mentioned, some of those ones that did supposedly come true are still talked about, whether or not, it was general enough where the prophecy actually meant something. And in some cases where it's very specific, whether or not they were written after the event occurred, because some of these were, talked about and then fulfilled during his lifetime. So he's a very polarizing figure when you want to talk about things like prophecies. One of the ones I remember hearing about when I used to look into this stuff was regarding King Henry II of France. I have to say of France because if you try and look up King Henry II, I think there's one from England too. So Nostradamus was actually friends with King Henry II, and he was the king of France at that time. So the prophecy wasn't stated to be specifically about him from what I can find, but it was written supposedly prior to its fulfillment. So this is what the prophecy reads. I'm going to read it to you. You guys can make of it what you will. It goes like this, quote, "The young lion will overcome the older one on the battlefield in a single combat. He will pierce his eyes through a golden cage, 2 wounds becoming 1, and he dies a cruel death." End quote. So pretty specific, you don't know who it's going to be about. What are your impressions of it, Robin?
It seems like something that is natural to happen. The son is going to overtake the father, right? It's just, I don't know how much of it is a prophecy or how much is like, let me add some fancy little, just a little dollop of boop right there.
I don't know what that means, but I think the young lion overtaking the older one is just something that's going to happen in nature. If you have alphas that are running around out there, sooner or later, one of the younger ones is going to want to supplant the older one. The thing that's pretty specific is the method of death. So this is weird because people hear this, they're not sure who it's supposed to be about, but Nostradamus was kind of the master at giving a few specific details that could be loosely interpreted enough to fit multiple things so that eventually you can just say like, really? Oh, this came true and it came true because XYZ. So that's certainly how this thing felt until King Henry II died. So King Henry II decided that he wanted to test his mettle against some of the younger soldiers because he enjoyed being a huntsman, he enjoyed combat. So he entered into a jousting contest. He wound up riding against the Count of Montgomery, who at the time was known as the Young Lion.
Wow.
And during the joust, Montgomery's spear, or whatever the fuck you call it, wound up riding up. I think it was on their final pass as well, and it hit King Henry II in the helmet. And when it did that, it exploded. The tips of these things typically are meant to shatter. And indeed, it did. The tip, after it shattered, lodged itself in King Henry's right eye, while the other broken piece of the lance embedded itself into King Henry's right temple.
Did he die?
He actually wound up living for 11 days after that, with the best, quote unquote, best physicians in France trying everything they could to prevent his death. So I'm pretty sure they peed on him and tossed some leeches onto him and hoped that would fix it. I don't know what healthcare was like back then, but I mean, in the early 1500s, I can't imagine they had anything other than like, let's remove it and then hope everything goes well after that. But yeah, that's what happened. So I'm going to reread the prophecy and then let you know some of the finer details about this. So the prophecy one more time. The young lion will overcome the older one on the battlefield in a single combat. He will pierce his eyes through a golden cage. 2 wounds become 1, and he dies a cruel death.
So pierce his eyes through a golden cage. Was his helmet gold?
It was gold.
Motherfuck. What the what?
Like, laying there alive for 11 days with these things lodged in your skull seems like an awfully cruel way to die. The guy's name was the Young Lion. I couldn't find any reference to King Henry II being referred to as a lion. I found his coat of arms. I found his shield from the day he died. Nothing has a lion on it. The shield is actually in some sort of museum. I can't remember exactly which one. It's over there in Europe, though. It's very, very pretty. Shocker, it's a king's shield. But when I say that Nostradamus was the master of things that seem specific but could be interpreted a bunch of ways, I mean, that's a pretty good example. But the whole cage thing and the eye specifically, people saw that and they thought, wow, like, Nostradamus, like, they're sad, the king died, but they're like, Nostradamus fucking did it again. This guy's good. So, I mean, that's an example of one of the things that came true, which had just specific enough details where people thought he really is a prophet. So now going into something that is less specific that people really latch onto is the idea that he predicted the coming of Napoleon. So before I jump into this one, I should mention that Nostradamus lived between 1503 and 1566. So like early and mid 1500s, which means that Napoleon wasn't even born for another 200 plus years after Nostradamus died. So now that that's said, you be the judge on this one. It's kind of thin, and I sincerely believe this one's kind of thin as a skeptic, but there are a lot of people out there who really buy into this. So this is this one's if I fuck up some pronunciations, forgive me for it. So it starts out like this. Paw, nay, Larone, more fire than blood, swimming in praise, the great man hurries to the confluence. He will refuse entry to the magpies, Pompon and Durance will confine them. End quote. So let me break this one down.
Okay.
So Paw, Nay, and Larone are actually cities in France. One of these cities used to be the home of Nostradamus.
I would have never guessed. I know nothing.
I think Larone is the one that used to be the home of Nostradamus because it's actually called Olerone.
I love Toblerone.
I hate you so much. And that's like a colloquial thing where like, I'm from Valparaiso, Indiana. We call it Valpo, you know? So I'm wondering if the reason why it's shortened is because he was so familiar with it. But he's basically stating the names of 3 cities, then more fire than blood. So those 3 cities, Paw, Nay, and Larone, don't really hold a particular significance to Napoleon. And I thought this was interesting because it's some real Harry Potter and Chamber of Secrets bullshit where rather than try and find significance of those 3 cities during Napoleon's reign or the French Revolution or any of that shit, people believe the reason that he spelled Larone without the O is so that you can rearrange the letters of Paw, Nay, and Larone to spell out Napoleon Roy.
Ah, yes.
But it's Napaulon instead of like Napoleon. But you try and tell that to someone who really buys in this prophecy and they're like, he predicted this 200 years before the event. And you're going to argue about spelling. So it's just one of those things. Like it just has that whole Tom Morvillo riddle rearranging into like the letters. Like she obviously had to come up with Morvillo as the middle name to fill in the fucking gap.
Right. Yes. Mr. Tom, a dildo lover.
It does also spell that, and it currently says that on our fridge right now. So we have like the letters that you can get where you can like make sentences, except we got it in like a Harry Potter fandom subscription box Robin used to have. And it came and it was those letters and it spelled out, I am Lord Voldemort. And of course, because it has those letters, you can rearrange it to Tom Morvillo Riddle. But someone on the internet figured out it also spells Mr. Tom, a dildo lover, which is, you know, it's got to be another Nostradamus prophecy. So
facts. Truth bomb right there.
So another thing that people connect this to is the whole more of fire than blood thing. So it seems to reference something in comparison to blood. And typically when people talk to blood, they're talking about your heritage or like your claim. Napoleon's heritage was not one from nobility. He ascended to his throne via a coup, by a military coup. So more fire than blood kind of makes sense there.
Ah, okay.
And then the other thing that's pretty specific is he will refuse entry to the magpies. Napoleon actually imprisoned both Pope Pius VI and Pope Pius VII. He did not let them go about their business like they wanted to. He threw them in jail. Like he found them, he captured them, and he put them in jail. So I don't understand the last part of it though. Like I don't know where people connect it to. Pompon and Durance will confine them. But yeah, having 2 specific names and then says will confine them makes people think like because he locked up the popes, this one obviously connects to. So it's just one of those things where it just feels like it's a bit of a stretch, you know, like Nostradamus had a ton of prophecies, like I said, but those were the 2 I really wanted to touch on in this episode because they're very different. You know, one is almost specific enough where you think maybe he wrote it before it happened, despite everyone that states that he didn't. And this other one is like, he made a really general statement that was fulfilled, quote unquote, 250 years later. And still to this day, it doesn't seem like all those details kind of line up. So that's more the skeptical part of me wanting to bring that one up to you. I mean, he has so many other prophecies like the rise and falls of cities and leaders, the Great Fire of London. He talks about Hitler, but not about Hitler specifically.
What?
That's another one that's like debated very highly. I think he says Hisler. I think he says something that's similar to Hitler, but it actually refers to a specific river. So it's another thing where it's like a city or a location being used and they're like interchanging it with a name.
Okay.
So we'll go over those in a different episode. We really could have done a Nostradamus episode, but I kind of wanted to break it up because he has so much that we can just do another prophecies episode and intermingle his stuff with some other ones that have existed throughout history. So
I didn't know there were that many.
There are a lot. I mean, there's books of them. So I do want to end this episode with one in particular. So this one is reminiscent of stories we have heard before. I did check. We have not told this one before. But we have had it sent to us, and in this particular case, it was sent to us by Marcia, our friend who just started listening to the show. We always mention her at this point because she's very invested, and she keeps sending us stuff as suggestions for topics. She sent this one over right before I started writing my script, once I had already picked my topic. So when I saw it, I was like, this actually totally fits. So it was very fortuitous, and I'm just going to end the show on it. So for this particular one, it takes place in the United States. There was a husband and wife named Samuel and Susanna Cox who lived in the Appalachia region in the 1800s. This event specifically takes place in the mid-1800s. And there is a specific date for it as well. So on the morning of April 24th, 1856, Samuel Cox heard his dog barking out in the woods. It was very early. Everyone was still asleep in his house. And when his dog didn't stop barking, he assumed that it meant the dog had chased some sort of game up into a tree. Typically a small game like a raccoon or a squirrel, something like that. But, I mean, that's a meal to someone in 1856 who's living in the woods, you know?
Right.
So he grabs his gun and he goes into the woods to check. When he returns, he goes to check on his sons, George and Joseph. George was 7 and Joseph was 5, and he cannot find them. So he asks his wife, Susanna, where the kids are. And she told him when she woke up, she assumed that he had taken them with him to go hunting. So she didn't freak out when she woke up and they weren't there. So they started looking together and they could not find their kids. And after searching and searching, they finally decided like they're missing, and they went to the neighbors and they had told them what happened. And by nightfall, a party of over 100 people had gathered to look for these kids, which is saying a lot considering it's 1856. And
right.
I mean, the population density is so low in this area and how far people would have to travel just to get the word out. 100 people show up on that night to start looking for these kids, and they search throughout the night, and they do not find them. They lit forest fires, like not like set the forest on fire, but they lit fires within the forest to
kind of like beacons, or
to try and get the kids to see them so that they would, come to them. They left people behind so that if the kids did come to these fires, they would be recovered and they could keep them burning. And they searched the creek in the woods as well, and they still found nothing. It was decided because the creek was running deep at that point that they would be unable to cross because they're small, and the amount of water that was moving was amplified from the fact that at that time, the snow was still melting from a late winter, and it was really fueling this creek to basically be a flowing river. So it only took 48 hours of searching before folks started to accuse Samuel and Susanna of murdering their kids.
Wow.
They started accusing them of killing their kids for the sympathy that it would generate and the money that it could bring from that sympathy. So the end of April for these two was absolutely awful. They couldn't find their boys, and the nearby folks who had been helping them look had suddenly quite a few people turn on them. And then a man named Jacob Dilbert had heard about what had happened, and he told his wife that he wished he could just dream of where these boys were so he could help these people find their kids. And that night,
it's really weird.
That night on May 2nd, he was said to have had a dream where he walked through those woods. And while he walked, he passed a dead deer. After that, he noticed a child's shoe on the ground. And as he continued into the woods, he noticed a fallen birch tree.
I just don't trust this person. I feel like he kidnapped this person and was like, hey, I found this evidence. Sounds like they should be here, Well, at this point, it's all just quote unquote a dream. So the dream continues too. He gets past this fallen birch tree. He keeps going. He eventually finds a copse of birch trees that's in a small ravine. And in his dream, when he discovers this copse of trees, he finds the bodies of the Cox boys. And then he wakes up and he tells his wife about the dream, and she tells him that she feels like it's significant, but he decides he's not going to tell anyone else, and he doesn't act on it. And then the next night, he has the exact same dream. And the night after that as well. So after the third night of him having this dream, he feels very overwhelmed, and he decides that this dream must be in some way a sign, or it could even be real. So he tells his wife's brother, his brother-in-law, a man named Harrison Wysong, about it. And they agreed to go and search the woods. They decide that they're going to look for the signs that he saw in his dream to see if they can find these boys. So on May 8th, they set out together into these woods where these boys disappeared. And after searching for some time, they come across a dead deer. And after that, Jacob winds up following the path in the way that he had in his dreams. And then he comes across a child's shoe. And then a fallen birch tree. And they continued until they came upon a ravine. And when they discover this ravine, they find a copse of birch trees. And upon arriving and seeing that, it's like the final thing. They start searching the area.
And sure enough, these two men discover the bodies of George and Joseph nestled in the roots of the birch trees.
I don't trust this dude, man.
Here's the thing, though, okay? So this particular incident is not a myth, and it isn't a legend. It is something that really happened. Its details, we're going to talk about these in a second, but it has been remembered since then. I mean, this is over 150 years old, and to this day, there is a plaque commemorating the event at the spot where the boys' bodies were recovered, with this story printed on it. It's in Blue Knob State Park in Ilmer, I might have misspelled that, Pennsylvania. And while I say this one is crazy and creepy, it really does make me wonder, the same as Robin here, just how well Jacob Dilbert knew the Cox family and knew those boys.
Right.
And how often he was in those woods. And I wonder whether or not anyone asked those questions, because as much as I would love to believe that the idea of a prophetic dream led to these two boys' bodies being recovered, I can't help but get the feeling that this sounds more like a murder and a cover-up at this point, you know?
Right?
Like,
for real, though.
There's no way to prove that this is the case because it's like 170 or whatever years old, but it just all seems really fucking convenient.
I just don't understand how he had a quote-unquote dream that led him to all this, to the exact area, what they needed to look for these bodies. It's just...
The one thing about the details of the dream that seems less sus to me is that he dreamed of where one of these shoes would be, because you would imagine that if he would have been the person who killed these boys, right? Why would he leave a shoe as like a piece of evidence for someone to follow a trail? Unless he just expected them to be found and then the, death to be dismissed as not a murder. And then when they couldn't be found, he was like, I'll be the one to recover them. And then I'll get the credit and, the plaque that will exist in perpetuity for 200 years or whatever. So this story, though, has become part of the region's history. And Jacob and Harrison are remembered as heroes. They're on that plaque. Like, their names are on there. And there's a picture of Jacob Dilbert on that plaque as well. So the dream is remembered as basically a prophecy that led them to the bodies of these two boys. And it really does make you wonder, though, like, for all the folks that buy into things like prophecies, like some of the stuff I've covered, like this particular story, how often could it be that they actually had something completely different that was going on, and it just so happened to turn out that people decided, like, oh, they must be a prophet,
Right.
They must have prophetic dreams, because it couldn't be anything else, because something else might be far too real and far too scary. So this one in particular, for me, was just like, don't buy into prophecies too much, because there's just a certain wisdom that comes as time goes on where you can look back at something and say, that really sounds a lot different than what it was. So either way,
all right,
that's the one I wanted to end on. So I hope you guys enjoyed Prophecies number 2.
Thank you for introducing me to these new prophecies and the fact that there are so many out there that I've never heard of. I'm very excited to hear ones that you'll do in the future. Especially because the Nostradamus, is that how you say
Correct.
it? Has so many other ones. I'm really curious.
Yeah, and I will say, hopefully it won't take 229 more episodes before we get to Prophecies number 3. I'll try and get it on the docket a little bit sooner than that. But yeah, I had fun with this one, and I hope you all had fun listening to it.
I'm glad you had fun. My ear holes are thoroughly entertained.
I hate you.
We thank everybody who's gotten this far in the episode and learned a few things. I know I learned a few things. Adam has learned a few things.
I learned a lot about courtesans for this episode, which was fun.
And some Japanese terms he didn't know. But yeah, I think it has been a fun episode. Very, very different topics. But I like them. I like them both. Creepy things always get me, and interesting educational ones that you got there going on. Even though prophecies are half the time bullshit.
I was gonna say, I don't know how educational it was, but it was hopefully interesting. So good to hear.
You never know if they're true, What if they actually happen?
I don't know. I mean, some of the ones that I talked about were, pretty weird. So, but either way, that's everything we have for this episode 230 of the Scaryish podcast. If you have a story you would like to send our way, it doesn't need to be about the topics we covered today. It could be supernatural, spiritual, coincidental, true crime, extraterrestrial, whatever the case may be. Feel free to reach out to us by emailing storytime@scaryish.com or go to our website, scaryish.com, and click on Contact Us. You can fill out that form and it will come directly to us. Or hit us up on our social medias. Facebook is facebook.com/scaryish podcast. You can also go there and join the Spooky Friends group, which we would absolutely love if you joined. It's a bunch of people that post on there. We also interact on there as well. You can hit us up on Twitter, which is @ScarishPod, or on our Instagram, which is @ScarishPodcast, and we will be more than happy to hear from you there as well. So yeah, Robin, for folks who would like to donate to us, how can they do so?
You can go to patreon.com/scarishpodcast. Those are monthly donations. Tiers start at $1. And at $1, you get ad-free.
Ad-free is the way to be.
If you're not into the monthly donation type thing, we also do one-time donations over at ko-fi.com/scarishpodcast. And we're thankful for everyone who supports us, listens to us, shares us with friends, family, coworkers. Y'all are the real MVPs.
Indeed. So thank you all for listening to this episode. We appreciate every single one of you. It means the world to us that you guys show up and listen consistently. It's been pretty amazing to see how this thing has grown since episode 1. I listened to episode 1 a little bit, and just hearing our excitement at the start of the show compared to like where we're at now has been pretty meaningful. So thank you all for that. We really appreciate you. But yeah, that's everything we have. So Robin, why don't you go ahead and sign us out?
Keep on creeping on, and we'll talk to you guys later.
Bye-bye.